All right, so this Knife Thoughts video is going to be my full review of this knife, and this is the Tacray DT-03. So this knife was sent to me by Tacray, and really it's because I bought a couple of their knives, the folding kitchen knife that they have, and then the DT-01, and I was really impressed by them. So I reached out and said, hey, would you be interested in sending, the other knife that they have, which is this frame lock, for review? And they did. They sent a pry bar also that I really love. I've carried it every day since getting it. And so I wasn't sure what to expect with this knife because there's a big difference between a titanium frame lock with all this milling and, a liner lock like this, although this knife is made very, very well also. But the main thing that drew me to this knife in particular is the fact that it shares a characteristic with this folding kitchen knife. And this folding kitchen knife does it even better, but that is having the edge well below the handle, which is what you want on a kitchen knife. You want to be able to get the edge all the way down to, your cutting board without having your fingers in the way. And it's something that very few folding knives, and especially EDC, carryable folding knives, do. So I noticed in the Amazon listing for this knife that it seems like the edge sat really far down below the grip area. And that is the case here. And so I got this knife and I was really, really impressed right off the bat with how it looks. So this is the blue purple anodized version, and it is definitely a mix of the two. I would actually say that to my eyes it leans towards purple, but there's definitely kind of a navy blue, particularly in the milled areas here, and it is really beautiful. I hope that the color is coming through. It's probably the best color anodization that I've ever seen. Now I'll admit I love lilac. I love the color lilac, the smell lilac, the plant, everything to do with it basically. So this kind of purple, deep purple color, I really do appreciate. And I think that it's a really, really beautiful looking anodization, not to mention the fact that it has this really cool kind of futuristic look to the milling. And there is a lot of milling on this handle. So you can see you've got lines here kind of striating across the handle that turn up towards the finger choil area there, or finger, where your finger rests. And then you've got these kind of trapezoid type shapes, or maybe that's not a trapezoid, but that, these shapes here. And then these are aesthetic here. You can see that one of those is the stop pin, but then these screws here seem to be pretty much just for aesthetic purposes. And then on the other side here, you can see that there's 3 lines milled out for the lock bar cutout instead of just one plain cutout area there. And you do have a milled titanium pocket clip. Now the pocket clip, interestingly, is not anodized. I'm not sure why, the pocket clip isn't anodized, but it gives it a little bit of an offset look that matches with the other hardware in the blade. I think that it would look fine anodized also. But there's not really any milling on the inside of this knife per se, but I just think that the outside here is just done really well. You can see that there's a lanyard hole all the way through there. You've got the back spacer that again matches this pocket clip. It's a plain titanium. And so the question then was, will it be comfortable in the hand? It looks like it would work, and it really, really is. My 2 fingers, my index finger and my middle finger, fit perfectly in this kind of cutout right here. You can see it goes down and then back up, and you can see that that edge is literally below my finger. So especially in a pinch grip, you can get this edge all the way down, actually having your fingers around the handle and get this edge all the way down to a cutting board or, whatever you're cutting on. And it is really comfortable, particularly for being a frame lock where there are no handle scales. The milling here and here makes it have some sculpting, so it feels really good in the hand. And If you watch my videos, you know that I think that a simple handle makes for an ergonomic handle. And while this knife has a lot of, you know, milling, kind of superficial milling, as again, aesthetic milling, it is a pretty simple shape overall to the handle. So, you know, you can get a grip on this and it feels great in my hand. The pocket clip is not obtrusive at all. I've used this knife a good bit and it hasn't given me any trouble at all with the grip. It feels great in my hand and I'm really impressed with it. So then moving on to the blade, it has this really interesting kind of what you might call a modified Wharncliffe blade. So instead of being a continuous curve on the spine like a traditional Wharncliffe, it has some kind of edges, some corners to the spine. So there's a corner here, but then there's another straight and another corner. So it's not really a sheep foot either. So an example of a sheep foot where it has, that corner, but there's only one corner. There's the corner and then a straight spine to the end of the blade there. So it is kind of what I would call a modified Wharncliffe, and I think it's a great blade shape. You get a really, good usable tip there if you needed to do any kind of piercing tasks. You have a good long bit of edge. This edge actually goes well below the handle. So you're getting technically, more edge than blade, because most of the time the blade is measured from the topmost part of the handle to the tip. So you're actually getting more edge than blade, which is always a cool thing. I appreciate a good edge to handle ratio. And this doesn't have, it has a continuous curve to it, so there's really not any truly straight edge, but because the curve is so gentle, it, you can use it like that. And it does work a lot like a Santoku, that type of kitchen knife where there's a very gentle continuous curve. It just, again, isn't that traditionally continuously curved spine that a Santoku would have. Now, the opening method here is this slot. And at first, in my unboxing video, where I also show the box that this comes in, which is a very, it's a nice pouch that this came in, I believe. One of them, the pry bar came in a pouch and this came in a box, or vice versa. So they both came packaged very well, and if you'd like to check that out, check out the unboxing. But when I first got this, I had a little bit of trouble where I was slipping off of this opening slot. And I think that it was really just because it's not the opening method that I'm the most familiar with. I mean, I'm very familiar with a spider hole, and I have this knife here to compare. I forgot to show it to you, but to compare, this is a knife that I've used a lot for food prep. But you can see, you really, can only get the very tip of the blade to, the floor of wherever you're cutting when you're actually gripping the handle. But anyway, I'm very familiar with spider holes, flippers, all of that, thumb studs, but not so much with slots. There are a lot of knives that have opening slots, and the, again, kitchen knife from Tacray has pretty much a very similar opening slot to it. But once I carried and used this knife, it got really easy. I got really used to it. So there's actually a couple different ways that you can use this opening slot. One is like what you might call a slow roll. So for that, you have to not be pressing into the lock bar. If you press into the lock bar, you will, well, I guess not always, but you will sometimes, have too much pressure and your thumb will slip off. But as long as you're not pushing a lot of pressure into the lock bar here, you can really nicely slow roll open that and hopefully not hit the mouse pad that you use as a background. But you can definitely slow roll open it. Then the other one is you can finger flick it. So you can middle finger flick it from the back. It works really well for that. That was the first one that I kind of got down, I guess I would say. But you can see it works really, really well. But then I also found that you can thumb flick it. So you can get your thumb into that corner. And you can see I did slip off that time. So you do have to get your thumb in there, but it definitely works. I got pretty used to that also. And, whichever you prefer, basically, you have all three of those. Now, I found that I mostly did the slow roll. And I actually used this knife putting some blueberry bushes in with gloves on, and had no trouble opening and closing it with gloves on. So, the thumb slot, while not my most familiar opening method, definitely works well. Now, speaking of opening and closing it, one thing that I would change, or maybe, suggest some sort of adjustment, is the access to the lock bar. Now, I've gotten used to it and don't have any trouble with it, but there isn't a whole lot of space between the front scale here and the lock bar. Now, you can see there is a cutout. It's not like they didn't put a cutout in. I just think maybe a little bit more of that would make it a little easier. Again, I don't really have any trouble with it at this point, but when I first showed this knife to my wife, she's familiar with frame locks and everything, and she had trouble getting in there. So maybe if you don't have quite as much meat on your thumb as I do, you might have trouble getting in there. But I don't really think that it's a huge deal. Like I said, with gloves on, for whatever reason, I definitely had no trouble, and after having it, I certainly have no trouble even just with my thumb. But one of the main things that I want to talk about on this knife is not the aesthetics. So I've talked a lot about how cool it looks. I really think that this is a beautiful knife. I think that it's one of the best looking knives that I have, to be completely honest. It just looks really kind of cool and cyberpunky in my opinion. But the real value of this knife is the grind. This knife is ground so thinly, it is unbelievable. I almost bought calipers I actually think I own calipers, but they're at my old house basically, or the house where I grew up. But I almost bought them just to see how thin this is behind the edge and compare it to other knives. But hopefully you can see here how thin that is ground. I mean, it is unbelievably thinly ground. This thing slices so well. It is shocking. And I actually recently talked about how thinly ground the Civivi Cubit is. And I don't, take that back. It was true. This Civivi Cubit is ground very thinly. So I'm going to show you that there. And I think that this Civivi Cubit, is among, if not the most thinly ground knife that I have, besides maybe this one. Another really good example is the Spyderco Police 4 Lightweight. Very thinly ground. But I think that this Tacray DT-03 may be the most slicey production folding knife I have ever seen. It slices like nobody's business. I will tell you what, I don't want to be sensationalist, but it is really, if you get this knife and compare it to other folding knives, I think you will be genuinely shocked to see how thinly it is ground and how well it slices. The caveat to that for a lot of people is the fact that this is VG10. Now, VG10, again, another reason I have this Police 4 here, is it is also VG10. VG10 is a steel that I am very familiar with, and I think is a really fine steel. I don't think that there's any problem with VG10, particularly on a knife that is maybe intended to be used in cooking. If you're going to be using a knife on wet things and not necessarily being able to wipe it off as soon as you're done, I think that VG10 is a great option. It's a pretty stainless steel, and it takes a really nice fine edge. So I don't mind that it's VG10 at all myself. This is not an expensive knife for being a titanium frame lock. I haven't even touched on that yet, but I think that VG10 at the price that this knife is a perfectly fine steel, but it's not a super steel, and it's not, more importantly for the popularity of this knife, a trendy steel. So for high-end knives, there's a real thing, which is, does it have trendy steel? And so something like S30V was the trendy steel for a long time, and then was overshadowed by M390. Now M390 has the same kind of reputation among collectors and enthusiasts that S30V had after a while, which is basically like, oh, poo-poo, it's just M390. So now it's, whatever, Magna Cut, I guess. And those are all great steels. S30V is a great steel. M390 is a great steel. Magna Cut's a great steel, all if they are heat treated well. But VG10 is a fine steel also. I think for the price of this knife, which last I checked on Amazon was $90, under $100 for a titanium frame lock, beautifully anodized, unique design, incredible grind, ridiculously good price in my opinion. But I think that this knife would be more popular actually if they took it, put Magna Cut probably would be the best decision, 20 CV maybe, something like that. But Magna Cut would probably be the best choice. And they could sell it for way more. So for example, you know, this is just one of the Wee knives here. This is the one that I had out that's full titanium. You know, a Wee knife with these features, but in a different steel, because we wouldn't really, you know, use VG10. But a Wee knife with this design and this, you know, level of quality, but with a more trendy steel would be $250 for sure. I have no doubt. So I think that Tacray has a great knife on their hands. I really like this knife. I think that it's beautifully made, really nicely designed, incredibly well ground. But I think that they would have a more popular knife if they put a more trendy steel on it and raise the price significantly. I mean, now, do I like that it's $90? Yes. I think that I feel very confident recommending this knife to anyone who wants a titanium frame lock, you know, doesn't mind that it's made in China, which of course it would definitely not be $90 if it was made in America. Anyone who wants a titanium frame lock, particularly if you want one that you can EDC but also use for food prep, I would be very confident recommending this knife for the price of $90. I think that you're getting a great value. So I really like this Tacray DT-03. I'm really impressed in general by Tacray's quality. This also here says Knock Knives, which is another brand that you can find from overseas. But I think that this Tacray DT-03 is a really good knife. If you're looking for this type of knife, I wouldn't hesitate to check it out. So thank you to Tacray for sending this knife. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, click the bell, and select all so you know when I post new videos. Check out my other social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Knife Thoughts, and my website, knifethoughts.com, where I post articles on knives like this and knife-related topics. And last but not least, as always, don't forget to go out and do good.